Toronto's condo market is making history with some of the slowest sales ever. Is Vancouver next, or are we already there? In today's video, we will compare the two markets and try to get to the bottom of this. How much slower is Toronto's condo market actually comparing to Vancouver's, and what that could mean for Vancouver moving forward. My name is Oleg. I'm a local real estate professional here in Greater Vancouver for the last 10 plus years, and that right there is Mr. Bond. Now, to put things into perspective, let's first look at the market statistics for May 2025 in Greater Vancouver, specifically for the condo market. There are a total of 7,370 active listings of condo units. Out of those, 1,087 have sold, which means there's about 6.7 months of available inventory on the market. In other words, if there's no more inventory coming to the market at the current sales pace, it would take roughly 6.7 months to sell out all of the inventory. This is a pretty good measure to tell us how busy the market is. Actually, the average price for a condo currently is $757,000, and on average, the prices have gone down by about 2.4% from last May to this. Now, some people will disagree with this number. That's totally fine. This is the number provided by the real estate board, so that's the number I'm going to use. Now let's take a look at the Greater Toronto area for the same period of time for condo market. There is a total of 10,523 units. 1,482 of them have sold, which means there's about 7.1 months of available inventory on the market. So this number is higher than what we have seen in Vancouver. The average price is about $683,000, and the prices on average have gone down by about 6.4% comparing May 2025 to May 2024. Looking at these statistics alone, clearly the Toronto's real estate market is slower than Vancouver's. First of all, they have more available inventory. Secondly, months of inventory on the market is higher. And third, the prices have dropped more than Vancouver. However, the differences are not as extreme as you would assume only looking at the headlines. Now, to really understand the slowdown, we have to compare it to something else. We have to compare it to a different months in the same market to really see if the market has actually slowed down, or maybe this is just the natural state for the market. And a good period of time to compare today's market to is, I think, fall 2024. So for this example, I picked November 2024. I think this was sort of the last normal months before the election in United States and before the tariff war and before a lot of the economic uncertainty has come to the surface. During this period of time, I clearly remember there was a lot of optimism in the air. The expectation from both the buyers and the sellers was that the interest rates are going to get reduced in the nearby future, and in 2025 we are likely to see a stronger market. At least that was the expectation in Vancouver. So I actually contacted one of the top producing real estate agents in Toronto, Tom Storey. He also has an excellent YouTube channel, to talk about whether they had the same expectations at the end of 2024 in Toronto's real estate market.
Yeah, it was really interesting. Like, as a real estate agent, one of the things we focus on when a year is wrapping up is how many closings do we have going into the next calendar year. And we had a ton happening, and we did see that uptick. And that was kind of like, as the election stuff was going on in the States and not knowing what the outcome was going to be, and looking over the last few years, like, I felt like this, at least near the end of last year. I'm like, okay, I think maybe the worst of it's over. Like, obviously proven very wrong, turning to the new year and trade war and negotiations. And then we had our own election. All these things have happened. So yeah, it felt like maybe there was a bit more light at the end of the tunnel as we were kind of wrapping up 2024.
So clearly both markets were sort of in a similar position at that time. And if we look at the hard statistics for Vancouver in November 2024, we saw a total number of 5,818 units listed for sale, a much lower number than what we see in May 2025. The sales numbers were 1,089 units sold, which means that the months of inventory was around 5.3 months, and the average sales price was around $752,000. Comparing that to Toronto, there were a total number of 8,209 listings. 1,640 of them have sold, which means that the months of available inventory was around 5 months at that time, and the average price was $689,000. With this new data in mind, now I think a lot of headlines make more sense, because looking at statistics, Toronto's condo market in November was actually stronger than Vancouver's. They had more inventory, yes, but of course Toronto is a larger city. The thing that I want to focus on is the months of available inventory. They had around 5 months at that time, so clearly a lot more inventory has come to the market, but the absorption rate or the sales rate has not been as strong. Vancouver's condo market, of course, has also slowed down. We had about 5.3 months of inventory on the market, and now we're at about 6.7 months, so there is a clear slowdown. However, now our condo market is stronger than Toronto's. So we went from a weaker condo market in November to a stronger condo market in May 2025.
Actually, looking back to a few properties that we had listed early in January, I'm like, wow, those are really good sale prices we got. We wouldn't have gotten that now. So it made sense not to wait for like the, typical spring market.
Overall, condo market conditions in both Toronto and Vancouver are just part of the story. To understand the real problem, we have to look at the pre-construction and the new construction markets, because that's where most of the issues lie. In fact, there is a new CMHC report that was just released earlier this week that talks about this exact slowdown in the condo market, in the new condo market for both Toronto and Vancouver. First of all, for Toronto pre-construction market in Q1 of 2025, there were 14 times higher levels of inventory as opposed to 2022. That is pretty crazy. In fact, there is about 58 months of inventory currently on the market. The absorption rates are just so low that the inventory keeps on piling on, and there's even this graph to really drive that point down. You can see for more than 20 years, the inventory levels of pre-construction units and new construction units have never been this high. Comparing that to Vancouver's pre-sale condo market, things are a little better in Vancouver, not by a huge margin, just like with the general market, but they are better. If you look at the report from Rennie that they just did a couple of months ago, they're talking about how the available inventory is likely going to spike by about 60% by the end of this year, just because of the low absorption rates. Currently, there is about 2,700 of available units completing later this year. Combine that with the completed projects that are currently on the market and the low absorption rates, we should see close to 3,500 available units on the market that are ready to go by the end of this year, which is a huge number. Again, this is sort of making history. There are several reasons why that's happening. I did a whole video about that. I will leave a link to it in the description below. But it is important to know that the available inventory is piling on to the market in Vancouver as well, just not as much as in Toronto. And the other difference between Vancouver's pre-sale market and Toronto's, Vancouver, we still have some sales here and there. Of course, they're very weak, very sluggish, but people are still buying, especially since developers are offering some incentives. We have seen the 25% discount. We have also seen the buyback program. We have seen rental guarantees, low deposit plans, interest on your deposit plans, guaranteed interest rates, etc., etc. There are a lot of different incentives for the buyers to come in and buy. It seems like in Vancouver, the developers are still trying to create incentives as opposed to Toronto, where investors just even stopped trying.
I mean, like there is very, very few developers even trying to launch projects right now. And so some developers are now having to change the price, but it's a lot easier to change the price on something you've already built. You just want to get out of there and you got leftover inventory, like I saw happened in Surrey recently. It's super interesting. Right. Way that they did it. I don't know if those were good prices or not. I have no idea, but it certainly worked.
Right.
The problem in Toronto is like, for what they paid for the land, for the development fees that we have, it's like there's condos that would like to launch, but they would have to launch at $1,500 a square foot and no one's going to buy it. Right. So the things we have seen in the past for incentives would be, free assignment, but that caused most of the issues we're having these days anyways, that everyone thought they could just assign it, capped development fees, a guaranteed rental lease back at a certain amount for a certain period of time. So those still exist for the few projects that are trying to launch. But there's really not much that's even coming to the market right now.
It is clear that the mistake from Toronto developers is exactly the same as the mistake committed by Vancouver developers, over relying on investor money. We can see that investors have pretty much exited the market. These tiny units that were clearly designed as rentals are not in demand at all. The first-time home buyers don't want them, and now they're just sitting empty until the investor activity returns back to the market, which means that the prices are slowly falling. If we look at the same report from CMHC, we can see that in the first quarter of 2025, the prices have dropped by about 13.4% in Toronto since 2022 and 2.7% in Vancouver in the same period of time, the last 3 years, which mirrors what we saw for the general condo market. Both cities have prices on a downwards trajectory. However, Toronto just seems to have that much steeper price decline as opposed to Vancouver, at least so far. So where do we go from here? Well, first of all, there are a couple of government interventions currently happening. For instance, BC's government did raise the no property transfer tax for newly built units for first-time home buyers from $750,000 like it was before to $1.1 million. That's a pretty big difference. On top of that, the federal government just introduced no GST on brand new properties for first-time home buyers under $1 million. And there's also a sliding scale for properties between 1 million and 1.5 million. In other words, the government, both local and federal, are trying to incentivize first-time home buyers to get into the market, but more specifically into new construction, which makes a lot of sense because currently that is the slowest segment of the market in Toronto and in Vancouver. The other possibility that we are likely to see moving forward, I'm talking about 2028, 2029, 2030, talking about years ahead, is a shortage of new construction, because at the moment the pre-sales are so slow that a lot of developers are choosing to put their developments on the back burner. A lot of developments are playing a little bit of wait and see game, which means that in the future, once all of this current inventory clears, whenever it clears, we might not have enough new inventory come to the market, especially if there's going to be a bit of a busier market in the future. But of course, time will tell what is going to happen with that, and I'll do my best to keep you informed. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel so you don't miss those videos when they do come out. Also, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. That helps a lot. And if you're a first-time home buyer, you just don't know where to start, I have an absolutely free buyer's guide linked in the description below. If you're a seller and you need some advice, feel free to contact me. My information will be in the description. Thanks for watching this video, and we'll see you next time. Bye.